Because you can't see the bottom, 3/4 of an iceberg, that it's not there. Of course it's there. Physics, our rule set says that it has to be there, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't float like that. It's the whole physics that followed how that ice got there, how it broke off, where it's floating. That's all part of the rule set, is determining all of that. That's all calculated. There's a probability of that. So when you get there, you can't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. This is not a thing that if I can't see it, it disappears. That's the wrong idea. It's that if you can't see it, it doesn't matter whether it's rendered to you or not. Okay? That's the thing. If somebody else is seeing it, then it has to be rendered. If those people in the Arctic get their wetsuits on and go down and look, they'll see a big chunk of ice underneath the water. Otherwise, that doesn't have to be rendered. But the effects of it have to be rendered. So if a boat runs into it, the iceberg doesn't just break apart and move away because it's only light, because it's just the tip. You have to deal with the effects of it. But you don't have to render the thing itself unless somebody's looking at it. So that's the nature of a virtual reality. That's the way World of Warcraft works and all the other virtual reality games. That's the way this virtual reality game works. It's a trainer. You only model what's necessary. Now look at our own models that we do, well, we in the world of physics, the kind of models that I do. If I were going to model, say, wind blowing against a tree, well, what's wind? It's air. Air is, half a dozen different gases, mostly nitrogen. Do I have to model the nitrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules and all that thing to find out how that tree bends over with the wind blowing? No, I don't model that detail. I model pressure, velocity of the wind and the surface area that it hits, the drag and the pressure and the bending moment, and I can model that whole thing very accurately and never, ever have a nitrogen molecule in my model. See, I just moved it up a level. I model what I have to get those results. That's the way modeling is done. You don't have to start at the beginning and model everything. So it's not quite as bad a problem as you think it is. Only effects have to be rendered. Yeah, this is another thing. Look at how about the engine under your hood? That's a good one. Okay, does that have to be rendered? No, but the effects of it have to be rendered. And the probability of whether it's going to start or not has to be rendered. And how about those people that talk to their cars, right? And they say, come on, Bessie, just one more mile, If you can just get me there, I'll wash you, or whatever. And they talk to their cars, they talk, and what happens? Do you think that makes any difference? Now, your scientists would say, no, it doesn't make any difference, But we know that it does, don't we? Because we can talk to that car, and if we really care about that car, and we love that car, and we are friends with that car, and we communicate with that car, then that car will do amazing things for us. Even when it should have broken down long ago, we're still going on it. And it waits until we get home before it breaks down. It does things for us like that. And you'd say, well, that's just circumstance. Well, sometimes it might be. But what about the people who curse their cars? What about the people who always, damn bucket of bolts and this kind of thing? Do those people have any harder time? Are they the ones that get stranded, 50 miles from the nearest telephone someplace because the car quit? Yeah. Okay, so what's happening is that it's not that you are changing the car. It's that the way virtual reality works, enables you and your consciousness. Your consciousness, you have this virtual reality. That's how you can affect this reality. Just because it's virtual, your consciousness, intent moves things. Your intent for that car to work better, or the relationship you have with your dog or your cat, all these things, it's your consciousness, their consciousness, the car. You are actually having an effect. So the engine doesn't have to be rendered. You lift the hood. Now when you lift the hood, they need to render an engine. But the probability of how that engine performs, yeah, that's there. And you can modify that probability with your intent, because that's just the future probable reality. You can modify those little spikes we saw sticking up there on that. You can make that spike stick up a little higher or pull it down a little bit, because that hadn't happened yet. And you can modify what's going to happen in the future with your intent, because it's just probability at that point. It's consciousness. It's just data. You can affect data with your intent. So that's how those sorts of things work. They don't have to be rendered. So once you believe, you see that everything is physical and it's all here, and you don't understand it's a virtual reality, then all those things become impossible. And then all those people who know that they have relationships with things like that and that it makes a difference, you know, then they're all nuts. You know, they're all just imagining it. And perhaps some of them are imagining it, but there are a lot of things that we can change because of our intent. Now, what drives our intent? It drives the kind of, you know, it comes from the kind of person we are. If we're a very loving person, we get a different kind of intent than if we're a very fearful person. Well, have you ever noticed that people who are very loving and have very good intents also tend to have very nice things happen to them? Life works good for them. They tend to be happy. They're not, you know, they're not negative. They're very positive. And hey, when something happens that other people would run off and cry, they just smile and say, well, that's okay. That's life. You know, it happens sometimes. And they go on. You see? It's different. So their life is very different because their intents create a life for them that's very different. So that gets us back to the fundamental point that you create your own reality. Now, you're not creating it in that you say, I'm hungry, you know, I want to create a, you know, a sandwich or something. That's not what I mean by you create your own reality. What I mean is that there are certain things that you have in your mind that affect your consciousness that affects the reality that you end up interacting with. It affects your relationships. It affects how well your car works. It affects all kinds of things in your life. So you do create your own reality. You create it in several ways. You create it, one, because of your interpretation. Something happens, you interpret it. Now, a person who is grown and has a lot of love and caring, something happens that's bad, you know, they may just, it won't make them angry. They just deal with it in a pleasant way, and that probably diffuses greater anger. So they don't have to then deal with the reaction to the reaction to the reaction. So it gets better. It doesn't mean that nothing ever bad happens to you. It just means you optimize your reality as you go. So one, what's inside of you, your intent helps create what happens. The second thing is that you have beliefs. And your beliefs and what you understand and your limitations and your experience interpret everything. So that's another way you create your reality. Somebody says something to you and you interpret it as a rude remark, or somebody's, you know, they're making fun of you when maybe they didn't mean that at all. That's just your interpretation. So you create your reality that way as well. So most of what we encounter in life is self-made. Most of our problems are self-made. Most of our tragedies are self-made. That's just the way it is. And some of them are there because we need them as lessons. Some of them are there is because we generate them. While I'm talking about generating things, we'll talk about fear for just a moment. Fear has that property that what you fear, you manifest. Fear tends to manifest itself. So if you're afraid that nobody will like you, you will probably act in a way to make people like you less. If you're afraid that you are not adequate, you will probably act in a way that will be inadequate. You tend to generate, you tend to manifest your fears. If you fear that you're going to get ill and die, you have a higher probability of getting ill and dying. Okay, the mind modifies your reality. What about the placebo effect? Placebo effect is that if you give somebody a pill that has no medicine in it, that has, you know, whatever, sawdust in it or sugar or whatever they give people in placebos these days, salt water, you give them a pill like that and you tell them that this is a great pill. This pill will cure anything, you know, that's just going to make your liver stop quivering, you know, it's going to fix you. A certain percentage of those people will get better. And it's not that they will think they're better, they actually get better. It's a well-known effect in medicine, placebo effect. Well, what's happening there? What's happening there is that when that person thinks they'll get better, they stop with the negative thoughts. They start with the positive thoughts. So, oh, now I'm taking this pill, I'm going to get better. Well, that I'm going to get better is a positive feel. They have a rosier outlook. They have a happier outlook. That actually modifies the probability and makes them actually get better. So it's not, the placebo effect isn't that people think they're getting better when they're really not, that it's just a mental trick. It's not. They actually get better just because their attitude goes from fearful and negative to more positive and hopeful. So that's why the placebo effects work. It's all part of the same thing. This is a virtual reality. Your consciousness, you modify what happens to you. Okay. Yeah, talking to plants. It's the same sort of thing. People who talk to their plants and love their plants, those plants grow so much better for them than the people who don't like plants. I mean, it's just an obvious difference. What does a green thumb mean? A green thumb is somebody that really likes plants and relates to them, and the plants reciprocate. Okay? It's the same sort of thing. We see this all over. It's not too hard to know if people or have experience with this. Same with power of positive thinking. It falls in the same category. Same with prayer. It's the same thing. It falls in the same category. If you can take your consciousness and your intent and focus it positively, you're going to help create a positive reality for yourself. If you focus it negatively, if you're always upset, you're always self-centered, you're always, oh, woe is me, nothing ever works out for me, and you're in that kind of a mode, well, probably nothing will work out for you, and you probably will have a lousy life because you create that. You create your fear, so be careful what you're afraid of, because you generate those things. You generate that probability. Okay, the last thing is, I mentioned in the bottom bullet there, is psi uncertainty. And psi uncertainty is basically a rule that's part of the rule set. It's just like gravity or acceleration or any other of our rule set rules. And what it says is that it's important in this virtual reality, because this is in an elementary school or a daycare, that we don't kind of institutionalize psi. That would kind of ruin things here. It kind of ruin the interactions. What happens if, all you parents, what happens if your children could read your mind? What happens if your parents could read your mind? It goes both ways. What happens if, you didn't have any privacy? Everything was open to everybody. Would that change your life any? Would that make any difference in your work relationships and so on? Sure. It makes a big difference. It's suddenly, all the interactions become stilted, right? Everything now becomes formal because there is no individuality now. You can't carry anything around in a brown bag, that nobody knows what's in it. So we don't want our reality to become dysfunctional. So psi has to stay at a personal level. So you can have a psi experience, and it can be a magnificent experience, and you and 10 other people can too. But it's not going to be something that's going to convince the large majority of people that exists. So psi kind of stays in the shadows. That's enforced by a psi uncertainty principle. There has to be a certain amount of uncertainty associated with the psi event before the psi event can happen. And it's just, there's lots of verification for that particular thing. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So, details are not rendered in the probable future database until a measurement makes it necessary to do so. Okay, now in the macro world, in the big world, we don't actually notice that very much. But in the small world, electrons, protons, photons, that kind of stuff, it makes a bigger difference. Okay, the probability distribution around an electron is much bigger than the size of the electron. Probability distribution of its location around a baseball is just about the size of the baseball. You see, there's a big difference there with the little particles and the tiny masses. So we can see effects of probability that are far larger than the effect of the size of the particle. So in the micro world, we notice. So these photons and electrons, just like everything else, they exist in probability until a measurement brings them into PMR. All right, let's look at the next one, which is a slide I think you've already seen. Now remember where we talked about this, and this was a really big mystery. It shouldn't be such a big mystery anymore. You have the probable reality that all the probable events and where all the particles and masses and everything is that the simulation keeps track of, and you have this probability of going through these two holes. So the sum probability is here and here, and it comes out with what's the probability at each point in the screen, and you get this pattern. And the reason for that is that this is the present. Okay? The measurement isn't made until after it passes through the slits. Here, The measurement is made before. So when the measurement's made here, it has to act like a particle. And because now it's in our reality frame. It's become physical at this point, and it has to act like a physical particle. Here, it's not physical until here. So as you can see, once you understand that we have a virtual reality and that virtual reality has these three databases I've talked to you about, then understanding this big mystery in physics of how this could possibly work, it's no longer a big mystery. That's how it works. Everything's probability. Everything we do is in probability. All the action takes place in the present. Everything that's future is probability. And then when we make a measurement, whether it's the trees popping up in the background when we round the corner of our video game, or whether it's an electron being shot at these slits, it stays in probability until the measurement's made, because the computer doesn't render things when it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to render them here. Nobody's looking. There's no measurement. So they stay in probability, and some of the probability can go through either hole, because this is the size of the probability distribution. So that makes it real understandable how that works. Okay, next. Okay, here's kind of a summary. Modeling consciousness is a self-modifying digital information system that evolves toward states of lower entropy. Okay, that's one sentence summary of it. Physical reality is a virtual reality, a subset of the larger consciousness system designed to help budding individual units of consciousness, us, evolve to lower entropy through experience and interaction. Now, just those two statements have a lot of logical implications. Physics and metaphysics become part of one logical theory and are thus unified. Eastern philosophy, theology have integrated with science. The same thing that explains the paranormal explains the normal. Love and spirituality are both defined in terms of entropy, a measurable quantity, suitable to the ways of science. Normal and paranormal are unified as ordinary artifacts of interaction within and between reality frame perspectives of a larger reality system. The fundamental purpose of existence in general, and our existence in particular, has been derived, and that is to evolve toward lower entropy states to become love. Time and quantum mechanics have been derived from fundamental principles, so we get all of that and some more. Okay, you know that lower entropy increases the energy, power, information available to that entity. So as you lower your entropy, you get more organized, you gain more power. That's part of what it means to lower your entropy. Lower your entropy is, in physics, a low entropy means there's more available to do work. Your energy is more available to do work. You have more influence. You have more power to change things. Well, think of people who have very low entropy, and you think of people who can accomplish things, people who can accomplish a great deal. For instance, think of some of the people who have had major effects in their societies and in their world. People like Gandhi, people like Martin Luther King. Well, these were people who had big pictures. These were people who were not self-centered and not self-focused on what they were going to get. These were people that understood love, understood connecting with people, and they were able to move major political mountains because of that, just because of that. Had they been firebrands waving, Kalashnikovs in the air, they would have accomplished very little, almost nothing. Why were they powerful? Because they had lower entropy. That's why. People who have lower entropy can, if they choose, explore other reality systems. It just becomes available. It's not necessary, but a lot of these things become available. They can make their car run longer. They can heal. They can do a lot of different things just because they are lower entropy beings. They've learned. They've grown. They're love-like. And they can do these things. That doesn't mean they always do. Doesn't mean they have to, and they certainly don't have to, you don't have to do magic tricks to be evolved. And that's not the point of it. Matter of fact, most of the time, the more powerful an individual becomes because of their reduced entropy, the less they do any of that stuff. They have no need for it. They have no interest in it. So those two things run together. The larger consciousness system is an aware, involving system. It's finite, it's imperfect, and it's not done. It's still evolving on its way. We're an individual unit of that consciousness, and that makes us a chip off the old block because we're consciousness, just like that conscious system, we're just a piece. So we're all netted, we're one with all that is, we're connected to everybody and everything because it's all conscious, all virtual reality, it's all consciousness. So we're not separate. The illusion of separateness comes with our rule set. Our rule set, one of our laws in our rule set says that only one thing can occupy, a place at a time, right? Two things can occupy the same place in space. We're separate. So we see ourselves as kind of us and against them, that sort of thing. And that's all illusion. We're one. We're all one part of one consciousness system. All reality frames and everything contained in them are part of the consciousness system. And the difference between physical and non-physical is just a perspective. It's not a real fundamental difference. Okay, what about brains? For one, consciousness is the fundamental thing. That's the superset, right? We're the subset. Physical reality is the subset, a virtual subset. Consciousness is fundamental. The physical is derived by sending data to an individuated consciousness, okay? So our brain is not creating consciousness. It's not that we have a brain and the brain somehow makes consciousness. How does the brain make consciousness? That doesn't compute, if you don't mind my language there. But consciousness makes brains, not the other way around. So what happens is when you come here, you come in with a certain amount of information that has to do with your consciousness. You're an information system. The information you come in with has to do with what you've evolved to at this point, how much you've grown. You come in with that. You come in with a certain amount of planning, perhaps, of what you were going to do in this lifetime, who you were going to do it with. But not everybody plans. At the beginning ends of this process, people just jump in and jump out. There's a very little planning because really all they need is experience. They don't know enough yet to plan. You just need experience. Eventually, you start planning. Eventually, your plans get more elaborate and so on. So it's not that everybody goes through exactly the same process. They don't. The amount that you might plan is dependent on you. But anyway, so you come in with that. And what your brain is a physical representation of that, of what you come in with. And it then collects